Well, the U.S. government managed to avoid a shutdown as lawmakers overcame partisan animosity to pass a temporary government funding bill that greatly lowers the risk of a shutdown, even as it delays aid for the fights over Ukraine aid, border policies, and deep cuts to federal programs. Our next guest is skeptical, though, and says that despite apparent progress, the agreement on temporary funding now increases the risk of a shutdown in the first quarter of next year. For more, we're joined by Charles Meyer, chairman and founder of Signum Global. Charles, thanks so much, as always, for being with us. You're tasked to read the tea leaves of what's going on in politics and apply that to investors, to walk us through kind of the shutdown risk and maybe even the greater risk, which is often, the debt ceiling.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back on. So I would say that the Speaker Johnson has been able to get this laddered CR through the House, which is good news. It means that, and it will pass the Senate here in the next couple of days, so we will avert a shutdown for now. But it means that we're going to have a bigger political fight in January and early February when the CR, the continuing resolution, runs out, when funding runs out again, and they have to vote to again fund the government. And the reason we think January is going to be an even bigger showdown, and therefore very likely a shutdown, is that only 57% of Republicans in the House voted for this CR yesterday. So it passed with a lot of Democratic votes. And what they're going to insist, what the Republicans will insist and the Speaker will insist on in January is very deep spending cuts, which are not in the current CR. So that's going to be the reason for the showdown. The Democrats will not agree to that. And therefore, I think we go into shutdown. One other quick dimension is I do think Moody's is likely to downgrade the United States in January if this does turn out to be a showdown and a shutdown. They did lower the outlook, as you know, earlier this week.
What do you think the consequence of that is going to be politically? Because when we got the last credit rating downgrade, you had a number of Biden officials, including Biden himself, come out and say, we disagree for all sorts of reasons. And the market, kind of flinched, but certainly got over it.
Yeah, I think, both the Fitch downgrade and now if Moody's does downgrade us are probably not going to be market moving events. Clearly, when S&P downgraded us in 2009, it was a market moving event. The market sold off 6% that day. I think from here, since we were downgraded by S&P many years ago, I think the view is that being downgraded one notch is not necessarily that consequential. The United States still has the world's reserve currency, can still borrow in an almost unlimited fashion. So I'm not sure I don't think it'll be a market-moving event. The White House won't like it. They will complain, but the markets will move on.
I don't know if it's a news flow, but you're closer to this than I am, but it seems like the ugliness and the discourse, especially within the Republican Party. I mean, people are accusing of literal fights taking place, physical. I mean, have you seen anything like this before? And what does this mean about, the ability to get things done?
Yeah, I can tell you in over 30 years of following Washington very closely, I've never seen the country this politically divided, and it's playing out, almost every day in Washington, whether it is literally these physical altercations that are now happening, in the Capitol building, not to mention verbal altercations during Senate hearings, which are usually, very, very civilized procedures, or civilized hearings, literally people threatening to have a fist fight with a United States senator. So it's really, I would say, a symptom or a manifestation of how divided we are as a country. And then within that division between Democrats and Republicans, the Republican Party itself is deeply divided between sort of the Trump and Trump's sort of far right Freedom Caucus and that wing of the party at civil war with the more moderate centrist part of the party. So I don't see this getting any better. I think it does speak to the dysfunction that was one of the reasons Fitch downgraded us. I think Moody's will do the same as a result. And it makes me not very optimistic about, getting things done, whether it's a budget and then the debt ceiling we don't have to deal with till January 2025, but that's going to be a fight too.
And we could have a new president by then. Is Trump going to be the leader of the Republican Party going into the election? We've seen reports that Jamie Dimon has been consulting with Nikki Haley. We've seen Citadel's Ken Griffin talking about, being close to endorsing Nikki Haley. Is that, how do you think about that playing out?
Yeah, so first on the Republican primary, I would say, Trump's still polling at around 60%, but Nikki Haley is absolutely the one to watch. She's running a brilliant campaign. She's incredibly good on foreign policy, on domestic policy. She's tough, she's smart. And the Republicans that are not supportive of Trump have all been looking for an alternative. And what they've been doing is spreading their support amongst the other candidates. As more and more drop out, like Tim Scott just did, it means that I think, and DeSantis has imploded, really. It means more and more will get behind Nikki Haley. And I think, the narrative from here is she just pulled into second place in New Hampshire this morning. It's going to be a two-way fight between Trump and Nikki Haley, and she's the one to watch. Whether she can totally dislodge him in the end is a really tough hill to climb. But it's going to be relatively close between the two of them. Having said that, I think Trump probably gets it.
All right. We have another major development that we're watching between China and the U.S. as Biden and Xi Jinping are meeting. We've had certain stocks rallying on hopes of thawed relations. Boeing, for example, that maybe China will start buying jets again. Is there reason to be that optimistic that, we can get back to better U.S.-China relations?
So I think the fact that the two heads of state are meeting in San Francisco is a very big positive. I think dialogue is always a good thing when you have two adversaries. So there will be a few constructive things coming out of it. China's already indicated that they are open to lifting the ban on buying jets from Boeing. So I think we might see an announcement around that, which would be positive. There could be some other areas of potential cooperation on climate change and a few other areas. The most optimistic outcome would be if the two sides have some language or commitment to coordinated tariff relief. We don't think that's going to be the case, unfortunately. It could happen, but we don't think so, largely because on the U.S. side, Biden would get a lot of political heat for that, as he'd be blamed for being too soft on China. So unfortunately, I think the trade war continues. And then the other two great sources of tension between U.S.-China, the U.S. tech export restriction list, and Taiwan, those two other areas of tension, I think, only get worse. So in the short term, maybe a little bit of positive headlines and news out of the summit, but medium to long term, U.S.-China relations continue, unfortunately, to deteriorate.
Charles.